Do you know what this is? Or do you know what this is? What if I told you that they are different variations of the exact same thing? My name is Lauren Hellickson. I am a paranormal equipment developer and builder, and you may recognize the crystal pod. It's my baby. What exactly is a proximity sensor, and why that means that all of these pieces of equipment are essentially the exact same thing? Now, I'm going to try to condense this information because we can really nerd out about it. So a proximity sensor is exactly what it sounds like. It detects things that are within its proximity trigger range. So there are roughly 5 different categories of proximity sensors. You have inductive proximity sensors, magnetic proximity sensors, optical proximity sensors, ultrasonic proximity sensors, and the ones that we see mostly in things like the REM pod, the crystal pod, the Paralight, tripwires, capacitive proximity sensors. So essentially what happens when you come in contact with a capacitive proximity sensor? Something, somebody, some whatever within the trigger range of the capacitive proximity sensor, it creates what's called capacitance, hence the name, which is essentially completing a connection of something that is storing an electrical charge. And then that electrical charge that is stored inside of the unit's capacitor releases a little charge, sets off the device, and that's how you see the lights and the sounds. Now, knowing this general idea of how these pieces of equipment work, that also brings up the issue of, is it always just ghosts that are setting off these pieces of equipment? No. Because proximity sensors, or anything that is triggered by ambient electromagnetic radiation, or anything that is a conductor that could create capacitance in these pieces of equipment, it does raise the volatility. How can we combat that? Should we throw away all of our REM pods? Everything that is EMF, just chuck it? Not necessarily, but we can create a more objective approach to using equipment like this. One easy way that I utilize in my supernatural exploration is bringing in a piece of equipment that does not work on the electromagnetic spectrum. Something like a static sensor, which I build one of those too. Because if I set up a static sensor next to my crystal pod, and the crystal pod's going off and going off and going off, and I'm not seeing anything happen with the static sensor, it's very likely that I am catching a rogue radio wave. I would say 90% of the false positives that we see in proximity sensors, REM pods, are radio waves. And those are sometimes the hardest to debunk as well, because they're not always going to be consistent or predictable. But if I set up, let's say, a static pod next to my crystal pod, the static pod lights up and the crystal pod goes off, I know that that static pod is not triggered by radio waves. So something that could be being created by some kind of kinetic energy that could be creating a static buildup, and the discharge also sets off a little burst of electromagnetic radiation, I might be onto something. So at the end of the day, when in doubt, throw it out. And how do you know if it works if you don't know how it works? I'm planning on doing more videos sort of discussing and explaining further about different pieces of equipment. So let me know if you liked this one. Comment, like, share, subscribe, be my friend. I don't know. Thank you so much though. I love you.